The final school bell echoed, laughter filled the air, students, giddy with freedom, rushed out, but for some, this day wouldn't end in joy. This day held terror. Emily Carter, a bright-eyed 8-year-old, waited for her parents. The usual spot by the old oak tree felt different today. Colder. A shiver ran down her spine. A rusty blue van idled across the street. Unfamiliar. A man with a strange smile watched her. Emily's heart pounded. Something felt very wrong. Minutes turned to an agonizing hour. No sign of Emily. Panic gripped her parents. The police arrived, sirens wailing, breaking the unsettling quiet. The search for Emily began. Whispers of the blue van spread like wildfire. Fear choked the community. The last day of school, once a symbol of joy, was now shrouded in dread. Days turned into sleepless nights. Hope dwindled with each passing moment. The mystery of Emily's disappearance haunted everyone. Meanwhile, at Northwood High, a group of friends dared to explore the school after dark. Legend spoke of a ghost, a former student who died tragically. They sought adventure, a thrill before summer began. The air inside was heavy, thick with an eerie silence. Footsteps echoed in the vast emptiness. A sudden cold draft sent shivers down their spines.
Did you hear that?
Hear what?
Old Man Withers, the school janitor, made his rounds. He knew every creak, every groan of the building. Tonight, something felt different. A chill ran down his spine as he passed the auditorium. A soft, mournful hum seemed to emanate from within. Curiosity warred with fear. He slowly pushed open the heavy doors. The auditorium was dark, except for a single beam of moonlight illuminating the stage, and there, lying in the center, was a child's doll. It looked eerily like the one Emily Carter always carried. Section 5. A chilling presence. Back in the hallway, the teenagers pressed on. They reached the old library, its door slightly ajar. A musty smell wafted out along with a low, guttural growl. They froze. The growl came again, closer this time. They exchanged terrified glances. Something wasn't right. Suddenly, the door slammed shut with a deafening bang. They were trapped. Panic surged through them as a cold, unseen hand brushed against Jake's neck. Section 6. Trapped in the auditorium. Old Man Withers cautiously approached the doll. As he reached for it, the lights flickered and died, plunging the auditorium into darkness. A cold wind swept through the room, making the curtains dance. He heard a child's laughter, faint and high-pitched. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Fear coiled in his gut. He wasn't alone. Then, silence. Heavy, oppressive silence. He fumbled for his lighter, his hand shaking. He had to get out, now! Section 7. A shadow in the night. As darkness fell, Sarah, a high school senior, walked home alone. The streets were eerily quiet, the usual hustle and bustle of the day replaced by an unsettling stillness. She clutched her backpack tightly, her footsteps echoing in the empty night. The streetlights flickered, casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to move with a life of their own. Each flicker made her heart skip a beat, the shadows playing tricks on her mind. She felt a prickle on the back of her neck, a feeling of being watched. It was as if the darkness itself had eyes, following her every move. She tried to shake off the feeling, but it clung to her like a second skin. She quickened her pace, her heart pounding in her chest. The sound of her own breathing seemed unnaturally loud in the silence. She glanced at her watch, willing the time to move faster, to bring her closer to the safety of her home. A low whistle pierced the silence, sending chills down her spine. It was a haunting sound, one that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. She stopped in her tracks, her breath catching in her throat. She risked a glance over her shoulder, her eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of movement. The street behind her was empty, but the feeling of being watched was stronger than ever. A tall figure, shrouded in darkness, stood at the edge of the light. He was barely visible, a shadow among shadows, but his presence was unmistakable. He seemed to be waiting, watching her with an intensity that made her skin crawl. He was watching her, his eyes glinting with an unsettling intensity. They seemed to glow in the darkness, piercing through the night and locking onto her with a predatory gaze. She could feel his eyes on her, a tangible weight that made it hard to breathe. She broke into a run, her legs moving on instinct. The sound of her footsteps echoed in the empty street, a frantic rhythm that matched the pounding of her heart. She didn't dare look back, the fear driving her forward faster and faster. The night seemed to close in around her, the shadows reaching out like dark fingers, trying to pull her back, but she kept running, her only thought to escape the shadow in the night. Section 8. The Stalker's Game. Sarah's breath came in ragged gasps. She glanced back. The figure was closer now, gaining on her. Fear lent speed to her steps, but it wasn't enough. He was toying with her, she realized, herding her like prey. Each time she thought she'd outrun him, he'd reappear, closer than before, a silent specter in the night. She fumbled for her phone, her fingers trembling, and dialed 911. "Help me," she whispered, her voice choked with terror. "Someone's following me." Section 9. A desperate chase. The operator's voice crackled through the phone, a lifeline in the darkness. Sarah clutched the receiver tightly, her knuckles white with fear. Every second felt like an eternity as she waited for the operator's next words. "Stay on the line, ma'am. We're sending someone." The words were meant to be reassuring, but the tremor in the operator's voice betrayed the urgency of the situation. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest, each beat echoing the seconds ticking away. But help felt so far away. The room around her seemed to close in, the shadows growing longer and more menacing. She glanced out the window, hoping to see the flashing lights of a police car, but the street remained eerily silent. She could hear the sirens now, growing louder. Hope surged through her. The sound was a beacon, cutting through the oppressive silence. She whispered a silent prayer, willing the officers to arrive in time. She risked another glance back. The alleyway was shrouded in darkness, but she could make out a shadowy figure moving closer. Panic gripped her, and she felt a cold sweat break out on her forehead. He was closer than ever, his face illuminated by the approaching headlights. He lunged, the headlights cast eerie shadows, distorting his features into a grotesque mask of determination. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she realized how close he was. Sarah screamed, the phone clattering to the ground. The sound of the receiver hitting the floor was deafening in the stillness of the night. She stumbled backward, her mind racing for a way to escape. The last thing she saw before everything went black was the look of pure, chilling triumph in his eyes. His gaze bore into her, a promise of the horrors to come. As darkness enveloped her, Sarah's last thought was a desperate plea for the sirens to reach her in time. Section 10. Unmasking the Stalker. The tension in the room was palpable as officers gathered around, their faces etched with determination. The photo of the stalker, a man who had eluded them for weeks, was passed around. Each officer knew the gravity of the situation. The city's safety depended on their success. The police apprehended the stalker, a man who had been terrorizing the city for weeks. His capture was a moment of triumph, yet it was tinged with a sense of unease. The flashing lights of the police cars illuminated the night, casting long shadows that seemed to dance with the ghosts of his victims. His motives remained a mystery, a chilling enigma that sent shivers down everyone's spines. Who was he? What drove him to such darkness? The questions lingered, unanswered, as the city grappled with the reality of his existence. The man, now in custody, offered no clues, his silence as impenetrable as the shadows he once hid in. News of the stalker's capture spread like wildfire, but the fear lingered. Television screens across the city flashed with breaking news, the faces of news anchors grave as they recounted the harrowing details. People gathered in their homes, in cafes and public squares, their eyes glued to the screens, their hearts heavy with a mix of relief and dread. The city, once a place of familiar comfort, now felt vulnerable, exposed. The streets, usually bustling with life, were eerily quiet. The usual hum of the city was replaced by an unsettling silence, a reminder of the fear that had gripped its residents. The cityscape, with its towering buildings and sprawling streets, seemed to hold its breath, waiting for a sense of normalcy to return. The shadows seemed darker, the silence more profound. Every corner, every alley, seemed to hold a secret, a whisper of the terror that had once roamed free. The empty rooms, the deserted streets, all bore the weight of the recent past, a past that had left an indelible mark on the city's soul. And what of Emily Carter? Her name was on everyone's lips, her face on every flyer. The little girl who had vanished without a trace, her disappearance a wound that refused to heal. Her parents, their faces etched with worry, clung to hope, even as days turned into weeks. The little girl with the bright smile. Emily's laughter once filled the air, her joy a beacon of light. The park where she played, now a place of sorrow, her absence a void that could never be filled. Her family, once whole, now fractured by the unknown. Her disappearance remained unsolved, a haunting reminder that some horrors leave scars that never fade. The flyers, weathered and worn, were a testament to the passage of time, a silent plea for answers. Her parents, hand in hand, walked the park where she once played, their hearts heavy with the weight of unanswered questions. The city, though it had unmasked the stalker, was left with a lingering sense of loss, a reminder that some shadows are never fully banished. Section 11, A City Gripped by Fear. The last day of school, once a symbol of joy and freedom, became a chilling reminder of the darkness that lurked beneath the surface. The kidnapping, the haunting, the Stalker 3 horrifying events that shook the city to its core. The city held its breath, united in fear and uncertainty. They had learned a harsh lesson that day. Evil could lurk in the most unexpected places, and sometimes the monsters were all too real.